Chapter 20. Although the Codex regularly provided me with valuable insights about the dwellers who inhabited the backrooms, this was the first time I'd seen a direct research report. It lacked the general schollishness of most of the entries, which meant it probably wasn't being delivered by my localized administrator. This was also the first time I'd ever seen an inquiry directly contributed to the researcher, though interestingly, it was marked as a junior researcher. I'd always just assumed there was only one researcher, but according to the date on the report, this entry was over 5,000 years old. What if, once upon a time, there had been more than one researcher? I wasn't exactly sure what the broader implications of that would be, but it would help to explain why everything was such a shit show now. There was also an interesting tidbit about early trauma inhibiting the proper formation of the Mimikor node, which probably explained why Croc was the way it was. There was nothing I could with that information at this point, but I tucked it away for later. Now I had a working idea of how mimics were able to do what they did, though I was reasonably confident I could reproduce that effect with my fancy new door minions. First, I harvested all of the nodes I could find. Although many had been badly damaged or outright destroyed, I found 13 that were still intact. More than enough for what I had in mind. Next, I started collecting mimic eyes. The report had mentioned that those eyes served an important role in the creature's ability to more seamlessly integrate with its natural environment, so I figured the more the merrier. And I had a lot of mimic eyes to work with. I added them to Horror's arms and legs, then shaped pieces of crustacean exoskeleton for extra protection. By the time I was done, the door looked like some kind of biblically accurate angel. Which is to say, absolutely fucking terrifying. In this case, however, that was actually a plus. As a boy, I'd read the Bible cover to cover at least one time through on the insistence of my mother. Honestly, a lot of it hadn't made a lick of sense, but if I'd learned one thing, it was that no one, and I mean no one, wanted to fuck around with a biblically accurate angel. Figuring out how to attach the Mimikor node took a lot longer than I'd like to admit, but eventually I found a way to integrate it with the creature's broader nervous system. All it required was a little open head surgery and a very strong stomach. Once I was reasonably sure everything worked properly, I added a basic combo kit relic to power my newest Frankenstein monstrosity. The undead doorway sentinel was horrifying. Didn't seem quite strong enough. Keeping with the whole biblical theme, an abomination unto the Lord seemed like the only phrase that truly fit. But thankfully, my scheme worked like charm, and the creature was able to transform just like a normal mimic would. With a command, its gangly arms and segmented crab legs disappeared, and its malformed head merged seamlessly with wood, until all that remained was a single, freestanding hotel door. Then, to finish off my masterpiece, I slapped one of my available doorway anchors to the front, and mumbled a soft prayer that this would work. The anchor plate attached without an issue, and when I tested the door, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of smug satisfaction as it connected to the shop's main entryway. It was perfect. A thing of true beauty and wonder. Now, instead of simply plastering my anchors on random doors, I'd be able to plant doorway sentinels. To most casual observers, the sentinels would look like an ordinary doorway, but they'd also be able to serve as added security against the aspirants who were busy trying to blockade my entryways. If any aspirants showed up to fuck with my customers, the doors would simply go into attack mode and start butchering anything that got in their way. And, if the aspirants managed to kill one of the sentinels, so what? It would simply return to its own storage container, where I could repair it and redeploy it elsewhere. The sentinels would also be able to relocate at will, moving locations when one spot became compromised. Best of all, the security camera still worked even while the sentinel was cloaked, which meant I'd have real-time surveillance monitoring of all of my entries and exits. This wouldn't fix all of my problems, but it was certainly a step in the right direction. With my proof of concept complete and functional, I spent the next 8 hours painstakingly crafting more of the sentinels. I only had enough material for 4 more, but that was plenty for now. Once the gory work was complete, I spent another hour removing previously established doorway anchors, then plastering them onto my new security team. I planted one doorway sentinel in the lobby, and another on floors 1, 3, 4, and 5. I skipped the second floor entirely, because that whole level could suck a bag full of dicks, and decided against planting one on level 7, since the door was already close to Howler's Hold and I planned to relocate it inside a safe harbor before much longer. At my current level, I had 11 total doorway anchors plus my personal VIP anchor, so I still had several regular doors scattered across the floors. Thankfully, I also had enough security cameras to go around. Installing them was a gamble, since it was possible my enemies could destroy the cameras, but that was a risk I was willing to take. Until I could get more doorway sentinels up and running, I needed a way to keep an eye out for potential threats, and this was the easiest way to do it. I also installed 5 of the remaining 8 security cams inside the store as well, just to be on the safe side. I doubted the aspirants would be able to get inside, but in my experience, people could get up to all kinds of trouble even if they weren't part of a demonic death cult. I placed one up by the checkout counter, another in the pharmacy, one more in the employee break room, then 2 inside the storage room turned Delver hostel. Once I was finally finished, I walked Kamo Joe through my new upgrades and gave the golem standing orders to radio me if he spotted any of those twat-waffles from the skinless court screwing around with my doors. Satisfied with the changes I'd made, the only thing left to do now was take care of my personal stats. I'd leveled up after obliterating the Shard-Stain Golem, and I still needed to deal with my outstanding titles situation. The mysterious virus system that governed the backrooms allowed me to amass titles like a prepper hoarding rolls of toilet paper, but I could only have 10 active title effects at any given time. Thanks to my new Profane Purifier title, I now officially had 11, which meant it was time to cull the herd. The store only had a single progenitor monolith, located at the front of the store, sandwiched right between the checkout counter and the concession stand. It was a blocky, slate-gray box which resembled an old-school ATM. The machines were extremely dated, but despite their rather humble appearance, they served as the sole access point to the virus upgrade interface portal. Having one in my store was a godsend for newer delvers who couldn't finish integrating without access to a monolith. I pressed my hand against the scanner and waited as a faint thrum of arcane power surged through my arm. The sensation was warm, but not altogether unpleasant. The customary welcome message flickered across the digital display. Welcome to your personal upgrade interface portal, Dan Woodridge, specimen biotag ID number 038-01-B00R7T569C. As always, the VRD is dedicated to making the best version of you through the multidimensional technological innovations of the virus variant individual registry upgrade system, iteration 21.2. Please use the monolith keypad to select an available option from the menu below. Subspace Storage System Delver Interface Portal Research Department Job Board. Learn about the Variant Research Project. Prize Gallery. I pressed number 2. The menu disappeared, quickly replaced by my specimen bio report. Every delver had their own SBR, which was a comprehensive personal file, containing dozens of different tabs documenting everything from biometric and medical readouts to meta-reality information, whatever the hell that was, and completed research achievements. I didn't pay much attention to any of that garbage, though. Instead, I toggled over to the overview screen. A floating 3D avatar of myself appeared above the monolith. Beside it was my specimen tab, which was basically a fancy-ass character sheet. It listed all of the most pertinent information I needed: name, race, attribute stats, equipped relics and, of course, titles. I had 5 personal enhancement points to spend, and even though I'd been putting most of them into resonance and perception, I decided to drop the whole lot directly into grit, bringing it up from 12 to 17. Maybe it was a rash choice, but I was tired of getting kicked in the metaphorical teeth by psychic attacks, and after tangling with the hotel lodger on the 5th floor, I'd made a pact to do something about it. An increased grit score would help me do exactly that. Dan Woodridge. Specimen biotag ID number 038-01-B00R7T569C. Variant assimilation level, 23. Race, human, archetypal. Current experience, 36,250. Next level, 41,500. Personal enhancement points, 0. _____________. Health, 77. Health regen hour, 3.35. _______________. Stamina reserve, 47. Stamina regen minute, 3.75. ________________. Mana pool, 122. Mana regen minute, 9.75. Individual adaptive stats. Grit, 17. Athleticism, 16. Toughness, 15. Perception, 24. Resonance, 55. Preservation, 8. Spatial core, active. U. Runic resonance trap, level 5. U. Fault spike, level 5. R. Unhinged taxidermist, level 5. R. Mental micromanagement, level 2. R. Existential dread, level 5. R. Pressure washer, level 5. R. Sterilization field, level 5. F. Neural slipstream, level 5. Fully tempered. F. Stain slayer maelstrom, level 5. Fully tempered. Me. Compass of the catacomber, fully tempered. Current titles, passive. Punch out. Champion, Death Wish, marked for death, weapon of opportunity, legend in the making, overkill overlord, barracuda and a barrel. E. Human cannonball, cold-blooded murderer. E. Bloodbath, profane purifier. I quickly scrolled to the bottom of the SBR, where my current active titles were displayed. That whole section of the report was an angry red color and strobed like a police siren. A new message appeared immediately below the title section. You have earned 11 titles. You may only have 10 active titles equipped at any given time. Please select a title to remove. You have 24 hours to comply. Failure to do so will result in all of your titles being rendered inactive until the issue is resolved. Please note that Barracuda and a Barrel evolving title cannot be unequipped at this time. I scanned through the list and whenever my gaze lingered a little too long, a description would populate. Overkill Overlord, gain a 2x experience bonus when dealing more than 10 times the amount of damage necessary to kill any opponent. Flicker. Marked for death, deal 15% additional damage to all aspirants of the Skinless Court. Flicker. Weapon of opportunity, deal 5% additional physical damage when using a melee weapon that can also be classified as a tool. All of the titles were zany and insane. Some were basically worthless, like Human Cannonball, which decreased fall damage, but only when I was bodily used as a projectile weapon, while others, like Punch-Out, Champion, were considerably overpowered. But this wasn't a hard choice to make. I knew exactly what title I wanted to do away with. It stood out like a festering wound. Cold-blooded murderer. E. I'd earned that one by killing my first Delver, a member of the Red Hands, named Natasha Anno. She was an aspirant and one of the Shithedsu tried to murder Temperance for the unforgivable crime of having one of my twinning rings. Despite being in the Marine Corps and serving overseas in an active war zone, I'd never actually taken a human life before. I'd been a truck driver, not some hard-charging grunt, kicking in doors and tossing frag grenades. Natasha had been my first kill and I still saw her face in my nightmares. I couldn't take back what I'd done, and I wouldn't even if I could. Natasha had been a bad person, and there was no doubt in my mind that she would have killed me if I hadn't killed her first. Despite the unsettling dreams, I had no regrets. I'd done what I had to do. Period. End of story. Still, I wasn't proud of killing her either, and seeing the title, Cold-Blooded Murderer, every single time I opened my SBR felt like having someone stick a knife into an unhealed wound. The worst thing was, the title was powerful. Far better than most of the others. Cold-Blooded Murderer. E. Earned 2x experience points for Delver deaths. Like I said, This shit gets easier and easier every time. This is an evolving title. Not only did it grant double experience for all Delver kills, it was an evolving title, which likely meant the more Delvers I killed, the better the experience point boost would become. Honestly, getting rid of it was probably a stupid idea. I was at war, after all. But it didn't matter. It was the right choice. I was more than happy to engage in some light bribery with Ajax and, unlike Jacob, I would absolutely kill other Delvers if push came to shove. This, though, was a line in the sand for me. Natasha Anno hadn't always been a bad person. Once upon a time, she had been a hapless noob like me. Just another poor schmuck who'd had the terrible misfortune of turning a clip into the backrooms. Before that, she'd had a life of her own. Probably, a normal life with a 9-to-5 job, a boyfriend or a husband, and a few hobbies she liked to do on the weekends. Maybe she'd enjoyed knitting or playing tennis. Maybe she'd volunteered at her local food bank. I'd never know for sure. But she ended up becoming a monster, and if I leaned into the cold-blooded murder title, I had a feeling my road would lead to the same destination. Make no mistake, I would do what was necessary to survive, but I also needed to be able to look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day. Better to die as a man with some semblance of honor, than to live as a monster with a conscience so dirty not even a bunch of laundry brownies could get it clean. Removing the cold-blooded murderer title didn't permanently get rid of the thing. In theory I could restore it at any point, but watching it disappear from my current titles was rewarding as hell. With a self-satisfied grin, I closed out of the monolith interface and went to find Croc. It was finally time to pay the hold another visit and settle up with Ajax. I had a trade empire to build, and the sooner I could settle things with the Howlers, the better off I'd be. Chapter 21. There were furries everywhere. In a past life, one before the madness of the backrooms, this would have been my worst nightmare. In fact, I was pretty sure I'd actually had a nightmare just like this once or twice in the before 4 times. Instead of being horrified, however, I was elated. One word I never would have associated with furries. Not in a million years. Yet here I was, over the moon, as countless Howlers perused my store. Every aisle was crowded with fur-covered bodies, and there was a line, 24 long, just for the laundry services. More were loitering at the makeshift dining area outside the concession stand, furry head masks sitting on the tables and floors as they binged on nachos, pizza, and hot dogs. More had candy and soda, and several appeared to be drunk, though Camo Joe was keeping a close eye on anyone who got too shit-faced. This was a store after all, not a nightclub. There were even a handful who had asked about renting cots in the storage area, though why they would want to stay here instead of the hold was beyond me. Honestly, as long as they paid, I didn't care what the reason was. According to my personal tally, there were 123 Howlers currently inside the store. Over a third of the entire hold's population. I'd left one doorway anchor outside of Funtime Frank's, and I planted another inside of Ajax's Tavern, the muzzle and mast. The line for my grand reopening had wrapped around the repurposed pirate ship twice over. Aside from the raiders, many of the Howlers hadn't left the safety of the hold in years, and most of the kids had never put so much as a single toe outside its fortified walls. Several of those kids were currently in the candy aisle, while a few more were playing with Princess Pony Puff. The kids seemed to be obsessed with the golem cobbled together from off-brand toys like an unholy Voltron robot. Even more surprising, Pony Puff didn't seem to mind. Her general disdain for humanity at large seemed to have an age cap, and anyone who fell below 11 or so avoided her prickly tongue and banshee wails. Right hand to God, I even saw her give out lollipops. For free. She never haggled, and she never gave out anything for free. Croc was also having a grand old time with the children of the hold, all of whom absolutely adored the mimic. And unlike most of the other Delvers who still gave Croc a rather wide berth, the children were all over the dog. Scratching behind the mimic's rubbery ears, offering an endless stream of froyo, or riding the dog like a large pony. I'd never seen Croc so happy. Not even after taking him down the big slide at the Jungle Gym Jamboree. The look on its face was pure joy. It was the look of an outcast who'd finally found all the friends they could ever want. For my part, I constantly roamed the store, introducing myself and glad-handing my new customers or helping cover the front counter when things got too backed up. It was exhausting given the sheer volume of new shoppers we had, but compared to murdering bloodthirsty dwellers for 15 hours straight, it was a cakewalk. Especially since I could grab a few beers while I worked. In most places, drinking on the job was frowned upon, but I owned this shop, so I could do whatever the fuck I wanted. Just one of the many perks of being self-employed. Even though drinking on the job was one hell of a great benefit, the real prize was all of the metaphorical money the howlers were spending. I'd offered a 20% grand reopening discount for all first-time shoppers, and they were taking advantage of all the bargains to be had. Hell, a good chunk of them acted as though they'd never be able to shop here again. The toilet paper was already gone, as was most of the meat and dairy from the refrigeration units. My stock of healing, mana, and stamina elixirs had run dry within the first 20 minutes. Wraith himself had been first in line for those. We'd already sold every single artifact we had on hand, though we'd acquired a ton more in return. It was the same thing with relics. My inventory was flying off the shelves as though the stock had wings, but we were replacing our supplies even faster. Even though many of these delvers were lower level, none of them were noobs. They'd been around for years, even decades in some cases, and they'd all acquired a healthy stockpile of loot which they were only too happy to trade. I sold beer, whiskey, food, potions, common household appliances and 1,000 other odds and ends, and reaped a windfall of powerful items in return. Honestly, it was a shock to my system. I never would have traded away even shit-tier relics or artifacts for something as common as a loaf of bread or a frozen pizza, but the howlers weren't like me. Most had no desire to go deeper. They also weren't fighting a war against one of the most powerful entities in existence. All they wanted was to be comfortable. For someone who never ventured outside the walls of the hold, a nice coffee pot, a panini press, or a box of their favorite cereal was way more valuable than some random-ass relic, which had sat unused in their personal storage for years. Although building a relationship with the howlers had been a nightmare of epic proportions, I was finally seeing the fruits of my labors. And by God was it a glorious sight to behold. I wasn't entirely sure how much our total for the day would be, but I fully expected to have enough relics, tokens, shards, and artifacts to backstroke through, Scrooge McDuck style. When I wasn't assisting customers on the floor, I spent most of my time behind the register helping Pony Puff. Other than a few eccentricities, Pony Puff was generally a great employee, but if there was one area she struggled in, it was customer service. As in, she hated customers and loathed serving others. She also didn't negotiate. Ever. Under any circumstances. Anyone who attempted to haggle or bargain was met by the ululating wail of a demonic goat, which lasted until the person either caved or slunk away with their tail tucked between the legs. Normally, I was fine with that. Generally, no one wanted to hold up the line while arguing with a nightmarish horror show, crafted from discarded children's toys. Having a bunch of angry and impatient people silently judge you at the cash register was one of the most awkward and uncomfortable experiences on the planet, and most people would do anything to avoid a situation like that. Even if it meant paying a little more for something. Most of the time that worked out great for my bottom line. But with so many customers running around, I just couldn't afford to have Pony Puff scream at every single customer for 5 minutes apiece. Not without eating through potential revenue. I needed to keep the line moving. So instead, she handled the more straightforward trades, anything that involved set pricing, while I took care of the more delicate and nuanced cases. The ones that required a softer touch and a bit of finesse. That also gave me a front row seat to pick through the best relics as they came across the counter. We received scores of common grade relics like basic combo kits or sucker punch, force multiplier and moving walkway. Things I'd seen a dozen times over or more. None of them did me any good, but they weren't completely useless and would be great resale items for newer delvers just starting out. There were also several common and uncommon grade relics, which I hadn't come across until now, that were surprisingly awesome. Chicknado resembled a colorfully painted Easter egg. It conjured a small whirlwind filled with angry chickens, who dealt both piercing and slashing damage and had a 5% chance of afflicting its victim with avian syphilis. I had no desire to learn what avian syphilis was, but I was sure it was the stuff of nightmares. An uncommon relic, appropriately named Reality Skew, warped the laws of reality in a 30-foot radius, causing things like gravity, motion, and even time to work unpredictability for the duration of the spell. It was crazy powerful, but too unpredictable to be effective in the field. Minor Mend magically repaired inanimate, non-artifact objects, while Beard Bond allowed the user to instantly grow a thick and luxurious beard, which could be controlled like an extra limb. Great for grappling opponents or holding an extra can of beer during a drunken rager. Squirrel Agility was an uncommon relic that significantly boosted athleticism and granted the unparalleled dexterity and nimbleness of a squirrel. Unfortunately, it also came with a side of extreme ADHD and a compulsive need to hoard small objects. Nuts, in particular. I was pretty sure that given enough time, I could forge some of those with other relics to help eliminate the egregious side effects. There was also a flood of lesser support relics that were invaluable for navigating through the ever-shifting landscape of the backrooms. Both the Delver's Wiki and Pawnshop Appraisal served a similar function as my Researcher's Codex, though neither were near as good. Lesser Trap Detection resembled one of those old-school metal detectors and allowed the user to locate physical traps. Homing Pigeon was the relic version of the Twinning String, and allowed whoever used it to tag a single location, then find their way back to that spot no matter the distance. There were also a couple of decent rare great relics that offered some significant combat firepower. AC Spike unleashed a javelin of ice as thick as my wrist, and Tesla Field created a passive aura that dealt shock damage to anyone, friend or foe, who got within 10 feet while the spell was active. Sharp-Dressed Man passively amplified the effects of all artifacts by 10% while equipped, and Conman's Charisma fortified grit and boosted the effectiveness of illusions and mind-based spells for a short time. None were better than my current lineup, but I stashed all of those away for later. Of course, all of the awesome relics were counterbalanced by the tsunami of worthless shit-tier garbage that wasn't fit for anything but the metaphorical burn pit. Night Hearing, Summon Sock, Involuntary Jazz Hands. Irredeemable, one and all. Those I also set aside. Fuel to level my other abilities. If I wanted to forge emblems, which was damn near at the top of my priority list, I was going to need fully level relics, which meant I needed a lot of worthless bullshit to sacrifice. It cost 5 relics to move up even a single level, but once a relic hit the first threshold at level 5, the number of necessary sacrifices doubled. 10 relics to move from level 5 to level 6, and 10 more for each subsequent level. And once a relic hit level 10, that number doubled again. In total, it cost a jaw-dropping 170 sacrifices to move a single relic from level 1 to level 15. Even though I'd advanced many of my current core relics past the first threshold, I'd barely even scratched the surface. There were 2 other extremely interesting rare great relics and one uncommon relic that immediately caught my attention. The first was just badass. I couldn't really think of a great use for it yet, not with my current build, but it was too cool to let go of. Voodoo Doppelbanger looked like one of those weird cornhusk dolls from a horror movie about dark magic down in the bayou. With it, the caster could summon an imperfect physical replica of themselves. The clone absorbed 20% of the damage dealt to the caster for the duration of the spell. Then it turned into a fleshy suicide bomb. The inert clone would charge the nearest enemy, wrap him up in a big old bear hug, then explode for the entirety of the absorbed damage. It was as twisted as a pretzel, and I loved it for that exact reason. Needless to say, I tucked it away for later because I couldn't bear to see it sold off to some other schlub. The uncommon great relic, Erratic Levitation, took the form of one of those cheap circular drones you could buy at any toy store. The kind that zipped through the air at Mach 10 speed, then bounced off the walls like a hyperactive toddler before invariably flying directly into the TV or the ceiling fan. The spell effect was almost exactly the same. Essentially, it would allow me to levitate into the air. Problem was, I wouldn't be able to control how high I went, what direction I went in, or how long I stayed airborne. In reality, it would have been a completely useless relic, but it had extremely strong synergy with mental micromanagement. When I ran a Codex Analytics report, I found the most likely outcome was a rare great relic called Mystic Suspension. It acted as a stable form of the base levitation spell. The biggest issue was it would only work on me, meaning I'd no longer be able to telekinetically control my tools. The juice wasn't worth the squeeze, but I saw potential. The final rare great relic, Quicksand Terraform, was a powerful AO ability that instantly transformed a 10 by 10 patch of floor or ground into a pit of bog-like quicksand. It was great on its own, but that's not why I liked it so much. Nope. Just like with erratic levitation, I grabbed it because it synergized with Pressure Washer, my best ranged spell. After a little tinkering, I discovered I could forge Pressure Washer, Quicksand Terraform, Burn Baby Burn, and a practically useless common grade relic called Arsonist Accelerant into something new and truly terrifying. Hydrofracking Blast Fabled Relic, Level 2 Range, Single Target Cost, 12 Mana-seconds. Sometimes, the solution isn't subtlety, but a high-velocity water jet of pure destruction. Even better if that water also happens to be on fire. And that's where Hydrofracking Blast comes in. Brought to you by the good folks at the Variant Research Division. That's right, friends. Unleash a beam of water, skinny as a noodle but mighty enough to punch through a fucking mountain. Oh, and thanks to a little gasoline and some completely safe and totally natural dissolved gaseous methane, this water's also on fire. It's the best of all worlds. Water and flame in a perfect yin-yang of death and destruction. What more could you possibly ask for? Moving at 100,000 psi, hydrofracking doesn't just erode, it annihilates. The target receives 1 stack of scorching erosion, suffering 25 points of piercing damage and an additional 20 points of fire damage per second as the fiery water eats into anything in its path. Each additional second onto the stream adds more fuel to the fire. In this case, literally. For every 3 consecutive seconds spent in the water stream, an additional stack of scorching erosion is added, dealing an additional 25 points of piercing damage. When an enemy receives 5 stacks of scorching erosion, all damage dealt triples for each subsequent stack thereafter. As the VRD is wont to say, go frack yourself. Right hand to the good Lord, it was a thing of true beauty. Aside from the distressing political commentary on the nature of sustainable fracking, this was basically the best parts of both Pressure Washer and Burn Baby Burn, combined into one magnificent spell. It kept all the piercing damage from the Pressure Washer, but now I could also simultaneously set things on fire without accidentally setting myself ablaze in the process. Even better, this new relic was fabled grade, but not fully tempered, which meant there was the possibility I could still improve it in the future. The description was right, it really was the best of both worlds. I forged all 4 relics without a second of hesitation, then sacrificed a few of the trash tier relics to bring it up to level 5. Based on past experience, I fully expected to unlock some version of split cast, which would allow me to split the attack into 2 streams, capable of targeting 2 enemies simultaneously. I was wrong. Instead, it added an additional effect I'd never seen before. One even more terrifying than the base spell. When an enemy receives 5 stacks of scorching erosion, all damage dealt triples for each subsequent stack thereafter and a new affliction is added, water table contamination. Once afflicted by water table contamination, any liquid within the victim's body will spontaneously ignite, burning them alive from the inside out. I felt a little sick as I read over the new edition. Although I had no doubt it would be extremely effective, it was also legitimately horrifying. I couldn't even begin to imagine how painful it would be to have all the liquid inside your body spontaneously burst into flames. Did that mean their blood would be on fire? The fluid inside their eyeballs? Or their brains? I couldn't even fathom it, But one thing was for sure, having your blood set on fire would be one hell of a deterrent. Although I had no desire to kill anyone, if someone backed me into a corner, I'd do what I needed to, and this new relic would certainly help get the job done. When faced with the threat of existential annihilation, only a fool overlooked a tool as powerful and destructive as this one. I was a lot of things, but a fool wasn't one of them. I wouldn't feel good about it, but I'd burn my enemies to the ground and dance in their ashes if it meant living to see another day. Chapter 22. Even though my grand reopening was going as smoothly as could reasonably be expected, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. This was the backrooms after all, and in the backrooms, there was always bullshit of one sort or another to deal with. This particular bullshit had a name. Jackson. Tribune of the Hold, cult leader, minor local celebrity, and the same brohol who'd assaulted Temperance and had purposely torpedoed our initial attempt to form a trade alliance with the Howlers. Although I'd never had the displeasure of meeting him in person, Temperance, Wraith, and Ajax had told me plenty about the guy, so it wasn't hard to figure out who he was the second he walked up, hell-bent on making my life more difficult. Without question, the guy was a douchebag of the highest magnitude, but I had to give it to him. He had a pair of brass balls to show his face around here, especially after everything he'd done. That or he had zero social awareness and a sense of entitlement the size of Mount Everest. Either way, it was perfectly in character for a guy who couldn't take no for an answer. Jackson was level 25 and unlike his brother, Wraith, he was still fully human. The guy was tall and broad-shouldered with blue eyes, blonde hair, and a jawline chiseled enough to carve marble. Unlike most of the Howlers, decked out in full-on fursuits, the leader of the roomkeepers wore gleaming silver plate mail and actual wolf hides like some kind of Viking cosplayer at Renfest. A great sword protruded above one shoulder and a flying mace sat at his hip. The guy might have been a jackass, but the way he moved, the way he casually wore those weapons, told me he was dangerous. This was a man well accustomed to violence and one who wouldn't hesitate to gut me if he had the chance. Despite the vague air of menace, however, Jackson looked more or less like the stereotypical hero of every fantasy novel ever. There were those who would no doubt call him handsome, and he wore charisma like a cloak. It wasn't hard to see why Temperance had been taken in by him, once upon a time. Me, though? I could see right through his self-righteous veneer. His eyes were cruel, and he didn't even attempt to hide the disdain he clearly felt for every person who wasn't part of his flock. Nope, this guy wasn't a hero. He was the popular jock in every teen movie. The arrogant young master, just begging to get curb-stomped for his general douchebaggery. Naturally, a gaggle of bootlicking sycophants trailed behind him. Jackson and the rest of his poser paladin squad cornered me in the break room of all places while I was taking a short lunch. I wasn't surprised. By all accounts, Jackson was a petty, self-serving narcissist who no doubt intended to either harass me, intimidate me, or both. One thing was certain, though, he wouldn't want anyone else to see what he was up to. Despite the clearly posted employees only sign on the door, Jackson and his cronies crowded into the room and formed a loose ring around me, blocking off the entryway. If things really went sideways, I could always backpedal into my private hotel room or into the newly added security office, but I was pretty sure it wouldn't come to that. In my experience, guys like Jackson were mostly bluster and noise. All bark, very little bite. Unless they were 100% sure they could win the fight, anyway. Which is probably why he hadn't come alone. Fair fights were for suckers and there was strength in numbers. His posse consisted of 5 other roomkeepers, though none were above level 18. At level 25, Jackson was the biggest threat by a country mile, and I was sure that was by design. Assholes like Jackson could never abide anyone being better than them. They always needed to be the biggest fish in the pond, even if it meant starving the smaller fish in the process. Truthfully, Jackson was probably the reason Temperance was at such a relatively low level. She had been with us for less than a month and had already leveled up 3 times. I'd never met a harder worker, and Temp was as fearless as she was insane. With her bloodlust and general zeal for murdering anything that walked, She should have been leagues ahead of the witless loser in front of me. So why wasn't she? Because Jackson ego wouldn't allow it, plain and simple. Chances were, he had probably assigned temp to a bunch of shit-tier rating details where there was a snowball's chance in hell that she'd actually level up. Starve the competition. Keep 'em in their place. It was one of the oldest tricks in the playbook. "You're not supposed to be in here," I said, pushing away my half-eaten hot dog and standing from the plastic table. "Not sure if you can read," I said, unable to keep my tongue in check, "but the sign on the door says employees only. Unless I'm missing something and Pony Puff hired you to clean the toilets, none of you work here." Jackson's eyes narrowed. Of course we can read, and we would never debase ourselves by working in a dump like this. My blood was already starting to simmer, but I kept a lid on my anger for now. Dollars to donuts, he was trying to provoke me, so that I'd attack him first. Then he could beat the shit out of me and claim it was self-defense. Not that I thought he could actually beat the shit out of me. Between Stenslayer Maelstrom and my new hydrofracking blast spell, I was basically a working war crime waiting to happen. Still, I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "Cool, well I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and just assume you missed the sign then," I said. "But this is an employees-only area, so if you could kindly leave, that'd be great." I made a little shooing gesture with my ketchup-splattered hand. "I assume you're Dan, the owner of this establishment?" Jackson asked, ignoring my completely reasonable request. He eyeballed me with open disgust like a piece of chewing gum he'd accidentally stepped on. The feeling was mutual. "Unless there's someone else running around in a knockoff Versace bathrobe and a too-old belt, that's a safe bet," I replied, already exhausted by this guy. There was a reason I worked in construction and not retail. People like this were the reason. I actively suppressed the urge to dropkick him into an active volcano and offered him a tight-lipped smile instead. "What can I help you with?" "I'd like to lodge a formal complaint," the man said in a huff. "Of course you want to lodge a formal complaint," I muttered under my breath, rolling my eyes so hard I was afraid they might fly out of their sockets. "I was told you would have elixirs available for sale," he said matter-of-factly, missing both my eye roll and obvious sarcasm, "but when I checked at the pharmacy, there weren't any left. My knights and I are responsible for the safety and protection of the hold, so I find it unsatisfactory." "You're a pharmacist?" "You mean Jacob, the guy you've met a bunch of times before?" I interjected. "You're a pharmacist," he said again, refusing to speak Jacob's name. "Said you were out, but I know you must keep extra stock in the back." "There is always extra stock in the back." He gestured toward the closed security room door as though that's where I was hiding all the really good stuff. "I understand that you can't just give out your reserves to the general population, but you should make an exception for us. We provide an invaluable service to the community and we're good friends to know." "Sorry for the inconvenience," I said with a shrug, not sounding the least bit sorry, "but I don't know what to tell you, pal. Our inventory isn't an endless bag of holding. This isn't a Walmart superstore. Some items are limited, and it takes time to restock. What we've got out on the shelves is what we have available. And everything we have is first come, first serve. If you wanted to get elixirs, maybe you should have showed up early, just like everyone else." The sneer on his face turned into an open scowl. "Surely you're joking," he replied sourly. "Perhaps I'm not making myself clear. We are important and our time is precious. My men and I don't have time to wait around in line." I scratched my chin, unimpressed. "I'm pretty sure your brother, who is also a tribune and the de facto leader of the fur brigade, managed to get a bunch of potions, and he didn't need preferential treatment," I said after a long moment. "But maybe I'm missing something. Maybe his time is less valuable than yours. Either way, there's nothing I can do for you. Our stock is out. Try back in a few days." His brow furrowed as he scowled at me. "In that case, I would like an additional discount on all your wares and services for me and my men," he said. "For the inconvenience. And I would also like to request that you set aside some portion of your elixirs for us in the future." I tried to suppress a laugh in his face but couldn't help myself any longer. This guy had to be joking. Had to be. Jackson didn't seem to think what he'd said was particularly funny because the scowl had morphed into a full-on glower. If looks could kill, I'd be dead where I stood. I tossed my hands up. Alright, I can't anymore with this. You really want me, the guy you actively tried to fuck over, to give you and your cronies preferential treatment? I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. Temperance told me a lot about you, but she neglected to mention that you also moonlight as a circus clown. I crossed my arms and glared at him, not even attempting to mask the contempt I felt. Just so there's no confusion, I continued, let me make it abundantly clear, I'm not giving you a discount and I'm setting aside jack shit for you. In fact, everything in the store is now 10% more expensive for you and all your gaggle of chuckle fucks here. I waved a hand at his followers. If you've got a problem with that, then maybe you should just save yourself the trouble and not come back. You might think you're untouchable because you're Wraith's newest favorite pet, Jackson said coldly, but I promise you, I am one enemy you don't want to make. I snorted and chuckled again, which really pissed him off. You think I'm scared of you, dipshit? I asked after a beat. I'm at war with the flayed monarch. Compared to him, you're not. The Black Harbor Syndicate is offering a king's ransom for my head on a platter, and you think I'm scared of a Ren Fair cosplayer with delusions of grandeur? Newsflash, pal, in the hold you might be hot shit, but here you're less than a brand new delver, fresh in from the lobby. The only reason I didn't put you and your buddies on the restricted access list was because Temperance asked me not to. For some reason, she still seems to think there might be something redeemable about this stupid cult of yours. Me? I couldn't disagree more. But either way, you've officially worn out all the grace I was willing to extend. Now kindly get the fuck out of my face and out of my store, before I make you. Something dark and nasty rippled just beneath the man's face. No one talks to me like that, he growled, and I could tell he'd finally hit his breaking point. This guy was used to getting what he wanted, and just like with Temperance, he wasn't going to take no for an answer. Last chance, I said, not even bothering to reach for the hammer at my side. Turn around and walk away before you make the worst mistake of your life. Might even end up being the last mistake you ever make. In reply, Jackson snapped his fingers, and everything seemed to happen all at once. Two men charged me, though neither had drawn their weapons, which was lucky for them. Probably the only thing that saved their lives. Kamo Joe materialized from the shadows and descended on one of the attackers like an avenging angel. The golem lashed out with an aluminum baseball bat, knocking one of the thugs unconscious before spinning in a wide arc and zapping the other with his inbuilt artifact taser. I caught the angry crackle of electricity and then the second assailant slumped to the floor, all the fight gone out of him. Jackson advanced on me in the same instant, one hand going for my wrist to prevent me from drawing a weapon. I smirked and didn't even try to stop him. I didn't need to. The second he made contact, there was a brilliant flash of white light and the whole store rumbled in protest. The light was so bright it left purple afterimages swimming across my eyes for a moment. When I finally blinked away the violet streak, I found Jackson standing in front of me, still as a statue. His eyes moved frantically, so I knew he was still fully aware of everything that was happening, but the rest of his body was completely unresponsive and would be for an entire minute. That was the effect of Stasis Halo, one of the store's primary security protocols. As the owner of this little slice of paradise, this entire store was built to protect me at all costs while I was within the confines of its walls. Anyone who was stupid enough to launch an attack against me would be instantly trapped within a temporary status field. This was my first time seeing the ability in action, and it was exactly as satisfying as I'd imagined. I slipped closer until I was inches away from Jackson's froze face. I warned you not to do this, dickweed. I tried to be the bigger man, to play nice, even though I think the world would be better off if you just voluntarily jumped into a wood chipper. But you couldn't leave well enough alone. You just had to fuck around and now you're gonna find out. Although I had no intention of executing him in cold blood, I did plan to make an example out of him. Especially since Status Halo wasn't the only store ability I had at my disposal. I pulled my hand back above my shoulder, then let loose with all the strength I could muster, slapping him across the face with the force of a bomb blast. As my palm landed against his cheek, I activated Banhammer. Banhammer was my most complicated in-store ability and served as an advanced moderation tool. As my slap landed with the sound of a thunder crack, Jackson just blinked out of existence. Here one moment, gone the next. Such was the power of the Banhammer. It had the ability to banish rule breakers from the store at will. To instantly teleport them to a random location on a random floor, so long as it was currently connected to my shop, via a doorway anchor. In effect, it was a giant get-fucked ejection button. As with Status Halo, this was my first time seeing it in action, and it was exactly as awesome as I'd hoped for. There was no telling where exactly he'd end up, but as long as it wasn't here, I didn't care. I had no doubt Jackson would survive the ordeal. No one made it to level 25 without some serious survival skills and at least one rudimentary navigation relic. Still, depending on where he landed, it could take him weeks or even months to make it back to the hold. That would give him plenty of time to reflect on all the poor life choices he had made. The rest of his thugs backed away slowly, terror etched into the lines of their faces. They had no idea what I'd just done, but from their perspective it would have looked like I'd just bitch-slapped Jackson out of existence itself. I knew there were a lot of rumors swirling about me, about who I was and what I could do, and although most of them were wild exaggerations, there was often a nugget of truth at the heart of every lie. So far as they were concerned, I'd just dispatched a level 25 without drawing a weapon or breaking a sweat. These guys may have been loyal, but in the backrooms the ultimate loyalty was to survival. Your boss is strong. He'll be fine in a couple of weeks, I growled at the remaining roomkeepers, but I can't say the same for the rest of you. So unless you want to get personally acquainted with the hotel lodgers on the 5th floor, take your buddies and get out. Now. That finally did the trick. It was like a dam broke as the remaining roomkeepers scooped up their unconscious and injured members, then beelined for the exit like the devil himself was at their heels. Maybe he was. I'd have to tell Wraith about what had happened, but thankfully I had the whole incident recorded on the security tapes. This might still cause trouble down the road, but no one could say I hadn't done my best to try and find a peaceful solution. All in all, it was a great first day. The Howlers were happy with the store. I racked in a metric-ass load of new items. I finally got a chance to see both Stasis Halo and Banhammer in action and, as an added bonus, I got a little well-deserved retribution on Jackson. Banishing him to a month or so of random wandering would never make up for what he'd done to Temp, but it was a nice start. Very cathartic. It was basically a perfect day. At least until the aspirants showed up on my doorstep. Chapter 23, 6 aspirants to be exact. All congregating around one of my third-floor doorway anchors. The one closest to my fancy new kiosk. There was no doubt about who we were dealing with, since I could see them clearly on the CCTV screens in the security office. The whole lot of them looked like extras from a Mad Max flick, crude body armor, tacky mohawks, and spike-studded leather. All of them were also missing white swatches of skin along their hands and forearms. That marked them out as both aspirants and members of the Red Hands. There were several gangs that called the top 10 floors home, but Hudson's Red Hands were one of the most powerful and numerous. They also happened to be the same chucklefucks who'd nearly killed Temperance, not so long ago. Although, I had a deep-seated hatred for anyone who swore allegiance to the flayed monarch, I had an extra special dislike for those twat waffles. This particular group also had spectacularly bad timing. The store was still filled with paying customers, and my crew could barely keep up with the demand. Taylor and Stephanie, my two human employees, were running back and forth between the front checkout and the concession stand. Princess Pony Puff had a line that stretched all the way down aisle 5, and Baby Hands was busy mopping up a carpet, bless his stupid heart. Thanks to the Blanket Fort's admittance credentialing system, aka the Shathad spam filter, they couldn't actually get inside, So under normal circumstances I'd probably just leave them alone for now and deal with them once things slowed down. That, or I'd take my fancy new doorway sentinel out for a test drive. These mooks had the supreme misfortune to pick a door I'd replaced with one of my new horrors, and I was eager to see how it would hold up in combat. There was one minor hiccup, though. The aspirants weren't alone. Because of course they weren't. They'd cornered a young woman who had the looks of a new Delver about her. I mean, I couldn't tell for sure because I couldn't see Delver tags through the CCTV footage, but it was a safe bet. She looked maybe 25, was short and slender with long hair, braided and thrown over one shoulder. She wore an ankle-length dress that looked like a stage prop for a Shakespearean play, and unlike her would-be assailants, she didn't have on armor and wasn't carrying any kind of visible weapon. Although I wanted to unleash my doorway sentinel and simply watch the carnage and mayhem unfold from a safe distance with popcorn in hand, I couldn't risk it. The sentinels were tough, but tough enough to take out 6 aspirants? Yeah, that was a stretch. Plus, there was every chance that the girl would get caught in the crossfire and end up in a body bag. I wouldn't be able to live with myself knowing I'd let an innocent bystander die because I'd been too lazy to drag my ass to the 3rd floor and take care of business. So, much as I didn't want to, I rounded up Croc and Temperance and we quickly made our way to the elevator. I decided not to grab Jacob, even though leaving him behind was a risk. He was busy in the pharmacy cooking up some new brews, and though he would have come if I asked, I didn't want to force him into a compromising situation. The Central was more than happy to slaughter dwellers by the truckload, but he wouldn't kill other Delvers. Not even ones who clearly had it coming. He'd hurt him. Incapacitate him. Even maim him if there was no other option. But killing other people, even as shats like the aspirants, was his line in the sand. He was like Batman that way. If Batman were a thoughtful German biochemist, who liked to read poetry, and had access to a bazooka that fired sofas. So not really like Batman at all, I guess. Still, I wasn't too worried. True, 6 against 3 weren't great odds, but that was before considering all the extra help we'd have. Drumbo and Cynthia 2.0 were good to go, and since I'd upgraded Unhinged Taxidermist, both were now effectively at level 16. The doorway sentinel was just as powerful, which gave us even odds. Plus, Croc, Temperance, and I were all a hell of a lot stronger since the last time we had gone toe-to-toe with the Red Hands, and I had some extremely nasty new relics in my arsenal. Besides, if things did go sideways, which was unlikely, we could always retreat into the store, regroup and grab some reinforcements, then take another stab at it. I'm sure a few of the howlers would be willing to lend a hand if we really needed the help. Most of them didn't like the aspirants any more than I did. I laid out the quick and dirty game plan and summoned my horrors while the service elevator trundled toward the 3rd floor. Temp and I would take out the Red Hands, while Croc's job was to protect the new Delver and get her to safety. Once she was out of harm's way, the Mimic would circle back around to help us mop up whatever remained of the aspirants, though I doubted there would be much left at that point. It was a simple plan. Straightforward. Hit fast and with overwhelming force. Use the element of surprise to take them down before they even knew how well and truly fucked they were. The elevator finally came to a rumbling stop, and as the doors slid open, Drumbo and Cynthia charged out into the familiar courtyard where we'd previously battled the kiosk crab and its murderous offspring. Temp and I were right on their heels, with Croc not far behind. There was no talking. No attempts to reason with these assholes. I was officially done trying to convince people to make good life choices. They'd made their bed and now it was time to lie in it. Now was the time for extreme and total violence. I planted my feet the second I was clear from the doorway and thrust one hand forward, then activated Hydro-Fracking Blast. Mana surged through my body and all the frustration and anger that had been building up inside me for the past few days came roaring out as a narrow beam of water, wreathed in a halo of flickering blue flame. I'd targeted a level 13 Delver with a large mohawk and a machete in one hand. The man was wearing what appeared to be motocross body armor, spray-painted and covered with metal studs. The armor didn't save him. My attack hit him square in the back, right between the shoulder blades, and drilled straight through his torso, then exploded out the other side. I cut the beam short, momentarily shocked by the sheer brutality of the relic. Although the beam had only been the size of my pinky, it left behind a hole as large as my fist. I could literally see through him, though bits of stringy meat dangled down, partially obstructing my view. Holy shit. I don't know what I'd been expecting, but it wasn't that. Despite the devastating injury, my attack hadn't killed the aspirant outright. Though his health was pitifully low, he was somehow still alive, though he wouldn't be for long. The man began to scream, a tortured, high-pitched keening sound, as roiling blue-white fire poured out of the jagged wound in his back and raced over the rest of his body. He dropped to his knees, weakly swatting at the flames in a fruitless attempt to put them out. That lasted for all of 5 seconds, then he let out a final gurgle choke and pitched over to one side, his corpse blazing like Yuletide log. I glanced down at my palm and stared at it for a moment in horrified wonder. I'd only hit the poor bastard for a second. Maybe 2, tops. If that was what happened with a single stack of scorching erosion, I couldn't even imagine what 5 stacks of scorching erosion would do to a person. Probably turn them into a puddle of steaming goo, if I had to guess. Off to my left, there was another roar of pain as Drumbo sideswiped a petite female aspirant like a Mack truck, then drove his new angle grinder hand attachment directly into her face. As a contractor, I'd spent hours cutting tile, sanding wood, and sharpening tools, so I knew exactly how dangerous angle grinders could be. They were versatile and powerful, but I'd seen the aftermath of a shattered disc, and the damage they left behind could be ugly. This, though, was devastation on another level. Skin and bone just vanished beneath the roaring circular blade, and a fine mist of pink and red materialized above Drumbo, while chunks of meat splattered the ground. The woman screamed, but it quickly turned into a wet gurgle as the horror effortlessly knocked her to the floor and shoved the grinder into what remained of her mouth. I had to physically suppress the urge to vomit right then and there. I'd seen a lot of gruesome shit since clipping, but that was next level. The sound of crunching teeth would haunt me until the day I died. On my right, Temperance had hurled her trusty ball of spider right into the face of an unhuman aspirant with delicate features and a pair of gossamer dragonfly wings jutting from their back. A prompt flicker to life above the strange Delver's head. Delver number 05T-01, B07PMLKR4Y, Irid, Transmog level 17. Meet the Irids, the prettiest little porcelain figurines in the backrooms. With their fine elf-like features and dazzling dragonfly wings, these magical powerhouses look like they belong in a fairy tale. Not the nice kind, though. The twisted, fucked up kind from Germany, where the monsters win, and the hero gets chopped up into little pieces and eaten by birds. The Irids consider themselves ethereal beings of pure magic. Honestly, they are not wrong. These glitter-skinned dickwads can blast out magic like a goddamn confetti cannon. But what they make up for in mana capacity, they lack in pretty much every other arena. They have the upper body strength of a 7-year-old and are complete glass cannons. Literally, since their bones are made from hollow tubes of crystal. It makes them light enough to fly, but the downside is that they're about as durable as a soggy paper bag. Have you ever seen glass bones punch through paper-thin skin? It ain't pretty, I can tell you that much, though they do bleed iridescent, which is kinda cool. I dismissed the codex entry with a wave of one hand, and it disappeared just in time for me to watch Temperance run across the Irid itself and lunge at the winged spellcaster. The Irid transmog was so busy trying to dispatch the horde of angry, scuttling spiders that they didn't see Temp coming until it was too late. Temperance lodged her cleaver into the meat between Delver's neck and shoulder. The blade sunk all the way to the collarbone, accompanied by a splash of shimmering iridescent blood. The codex entry was right. It was kinda beautiful. Like watching a rainbow bleed. Temperance yanked her blade free and drove it home again, this time directly into the Delver's skull. The transmog's HP hit 0 and her legs folded. I pulled my gaze away from the grisly scene, scanning the field for another aspirant to unleash my new war crime on. I found one off to the left. A stocky, spark plug of a man wearing what looked like a latex gimp suit with chrome chains draped across his shoulders and chest. The bondage freak was currently squaring off against Cynthia, and the two seemed evenly matched. He fought with a long meat hook attached to the end of a chain like some kind of Cenobite reject straight out of a Hellraiser flick. He twirled the chain with expert precision, lashing out and tearing away chunks of meat with the hook end. Cynthia did her best to fend off the blows with her crab arm, but it was a losing battle. He was just too damned fast. And every time she landed a hit with her chainsaw, a rancid aura the color of an old scab would envelop his body like a second skin. The magic, whatever it was, completely negated her attack damage. In fact, every time she hit him, his total health pool increased. With a thought, my demolition screwdriver shot toward the aspirant like a javelin fired from the business end of a fucking howitzer. My screwdriver was inches away from punching through the guy's throat when suddenly it hit. Something else. A force field was my best guess, though it was totally invisible to the naked eye. A bright lance of pain slammed into my skull and a sensation that I could only describe as psychic feedback ripped its way through my body, searing every nerve ending at once and chewing through a fifth of my HP in the process. I'd never experienced anything even remotely like it. It almost felt as though some greater psychic force had neatly sliced through my telepathic link to the screwdriver. I dropped to one knee and reflexively clutched at my head as the world reeled drunkenly around me. Blood streamed from both nostrils and my stomach lurched, an army of butterflies dogfighting inside my belly. It was all I could do to keep my lunch down. After a handful of seconds, the sensation began to fade, and I blinked away the dizziness. When I focused on the aspirant in the gimp suit, I abruptly discovered that he wasn't where he'd been just a moment before. Instead, he hung in the air, surrounded in an otherworldly halo of purple light. And not just him, I realized with a start. All of the remaining aspirants floated 6 or 7 feet above the courtyard floor, their arms and legs stretched out so they looked like giant human X's. "Dan, help!" came the cry of an all-too-familiar voice. "I can't move, Dan. Something's holding me in place." I clumsily gained my feet and spun in a slow, unsteady circle. The breath caught in my throat when I saw Croc hovering in the air along with the aspirants. The mimic wasn't stretched out like the others, but the dog-turned grizzly was surrounded by the same unsettling glow. My mind raced as I considered my options. None of them were good. The best I could do was trigger neural slipstream, then hopefully get close enough to activate sterilization field and neutralize the... Before I could even finish the thought, the aspirants started to scream, the chorus of shrieks accompanied by a terrible, wet-ripping noise. I watched in shocked dismay as the aspirant's arms and legs were crudely torn away. The limbs dropped to the floor, leaving the wailing torsos alive and hanging in the air. Wire-fine purple lines, which formed a grid of 1-inch squares, appeared on each aspirant, as if cast by a projector. There was one final cry of agony, and then the screams abruptly stopped, as though cut short with the edge of a knife. What was left of the aspirants simply fell apart. 1-inch cubes of skin and meat, hair and bone, tumbled to the floor, forming 3 gory piles. Croc was mercifully alive, though the grizzly dog still hung in the air, supported by the light. For the first time, I noticed that same violet glow surrounded the woman we'd come to rescue. The delver with the long braid and the odd, Shakespearean dress. The one who looked like she'd stepped off the dusty streets of a county Ren fair. A tag flashed above her head. Delver number 03V-04, B0D3FMDBS2, human, variant level? Well shit. The fact that I couldn't even tell what level this lady was, probably wasn't a great sign. Chances were, this was a trap, and we'd walked right into it. Chapter 24. If you hurt my dog, I growled, blood still dripping from my nose, I swear to the good Lord above, it'll be the last thing you ever do. The woman responded with a tight-lipped smile, her expression as sharp as a razor. Why would I ever want to harm your poor, sweet, precious pet? She asked, raising a single eyebrow. I know how much the beast means to you. I was merely trying to ensure it came to no harm during this unfortunate altercation. She gestured with a slender hand toward the carnage around us. The courtyard was now a butcher's block, soaked in blood. But since the danger has passed, she added almost playfully, there's no need for such precautions anymore. Her words were pure bullshit, and we both knew it. Croc didn't need protecting, not from the aspirants, anyway. She had done this to prove a point. To show that she could do to us what she had done to the Red Hands if she felt like it. With a casual wave, she released her hold on Croc. The mimic, suspended in the air, drifted to the ground, its bear-like hind feet touching down softly before the violet glow around it winked out. The same energy enveloping the woman vanished as well, leaving her looking pale, almost fragile. But after her little display, I knew she was more dangerous than any of the aspirants we'd come to save her from. I wasn't sure what kind of relics she had, but clearly this woman wasn't just dangerous, she was apocalyptic. A biblical plague wrapped in silk. Croc, I barked, never taking my eyes off the woman, get back to the door. If I tell you to run, you run. Got it? But, Dan, Croc started. Just do it, okay? I snapped, pulling my hammer free from my belt while simultaneously preparing to hit the woman with a concentrated geyser of hydroblast. She might have been tough, but I doubted she could shrug off 100,000 psi of scalding water. She raised her hands in mock surrender. There's no need for that, she said calmly. I have no intention of harming you or your friends. Quite the opposite, actually. Hard as it may be to believe, I harbor no ill will toward you. I come in peace. Peace? Yeah, right. I'd just watched her turn 3 aspirants into meat cubes without so much as lifting a finger. Still, I held my ground. Running would only make things worse. This lady was a predator, pure and simple, and you never turned your back on a predator. Never. They could smell fear, taste weakness, and if I projected anything other than complete go-fuck-yourself confidence, there was every chance that she'd attack, despite her promise to the contrary. This doesn't look especially peaceful to me, I said, gesturing to the corpses scattered around the courtyard. She tilted her head and smiled, though there was nothing even remotely friendly in the gesture. Perhaps I should clarify, I mean you no ill will. These wretched creatures, however, were monsters. Less than human. Something dark and nasty flashed behind her eyes. They deserved their fate. She paused and cocked her head to one side. Surely you agree, no? Her gaze darted toward the aspirant I'd killed. It was impossible to miss the smoldering hole punched all the way through his chest. The flames had continued to burn, reducing him to a blackened shell. I hadn't even gotten the guy's name. I'd just murdered him where he stood. The thought hit me like a dull weight in my chest. And yet, I felt nothing. No guilt. No remorse. Just a faint thread of relief. It wasn't like when I'd killed Natasha, that had been messy, haunted by hesitation and regret. This was different. Cold. Clinical. That scared me almost as much as the woman standing before me. I shoved the thought aside, though. Emotions could wait. Right now, I had bigger problems to deal with. Yeah, but I didn't slap-chop him into stew meat, I shot back, sounding more defensive than I liked. What you did was just excessive. The woman shrugged. You say excessive, I say efficient. Besides, the only reason you didn't do it is because you lack the power. But if I gave you my relic, she tapped her nose knowingly, wouldn't you have done the same? Her words hit a nerve, and I hated that she was probably right. It doesn't matter either way, she continued after a beat. In the end, dead is dead. Whether it's a meat cleaver, angle grinder, or a jet of supercharged water, the result is the same. That's not true, Croc interrupted, padding over to sit beside me, its voice firm and unyielding. Sorry, Dan, but friends don't leave friends behind, the mimic whispered softly to me before turning back to face down the woman. Intent matters. Maybe the end result doesn't change, but why you do something does. You wanted to kill those people. I can see it in your eyes. You enjoyed it. But I'm not going to let you do that to Dan. He's my best friend, and if you want to hurt him, well, you'll have to go through me first. The mimic moved forward, positioning itself firmly between me and the woman. The move caught me completely off guard. But I was even more surprised when Temperance joined. Together, the two of them formed a wall in front of me. Well, they tried to. Temperance was all of 5 feet nothing and Croc was down on all fours, so it wasn't much of a wall, but it was the sentiment that counted. "If I tell you to run, Dan," the dog whispered, throwing my words from before right back in my face, "you do it. Think about all those kids up there. The ones playing with toys and eating froyo. If something happens to me, it'll be sad. If something happens to you, everything we've built will die. I can't let that happen." I'd known Croc long enough to tell that there was no reasoning with the dog. But Temperance was smarter than that. "Temp," I urged under my breath, "you don't need to do this." She shrugged, her floppy bunny ears bouncing from the motion. "I won't run from a fight." She smiled and twirled her meat cleaver with a flourish. "Especially not one that promises to be so very entertaining." "Adorable, truly," the woman said, clapping softly. "But all very unnecessary, I can assure you. As I said, I have no intention of harming you. Surely you must realize that if I wanted to kill you, I would have done so already. Or do you doubt I have the power to dispatch the 3 of you just as easily as I dispatched the 3 of them?" "Maybe, maybe not," I said, cracking my neck. "But we won't go down without a fight." "Why fight at all?" she asked, spreading her hands in welcome. "Why not extend a modicum of trust instead?" "Trust is in short supply around here," I growled, "and you haven't given us much reason to give you any. Hell, you haven't even told us who you are or what you want. It's like Croc always says, the #1 survival rule in the backrooms is to assume that everything, everywhere, all the time is both lying to you and trying to kill you." "That is a good rule of thumb," the woman replied, folding her hands behind her back, "and one which you would do well to follow more closely in the future. You're getting stronger, Dan, but that strength is already leading you to be overconfident," she chided, sounding almost disappointed in me. "You made assumptions about me," she continued. "Dangerous assumptions that could have gotten you killed in a most untimely manner if my intentions weren't pure as the driven snow. You took one look at me on those security monitors and believed you were rushing in to help a wayward damsel in distress." The words were a gut punch. I was positive this lady had never paid a visit to the store, the level cap alone would have kept her out, so how could she possibly have known about my security system? She was telling me, without using so many words, that she had eyes and ears inside my store. That she was watching me. Admittedly, it was quite the heroic gesture, she said, but foolish all the same. "You've made waves, Dan. And even though you are a tiny, insignificant minnow swimming at the top of a very large pond, I can promise you that the monstrous fish below have finally taken notice." She paused and leaned forward ever so slightly. "And I'm not just talking about the flayed monarch. They are watching, Dan. All of them. Moving forward, paranoia is your best friend," she said, her tone cold and absolute. "Trust nothing. No one, except me of course." She flashed me another cold smile. "Although it is supremely unlikely that any of the Dark Lords and ladies will waste their time accosting you directly, believe me when I say they will dispatch agents of their own. And I'm not talking about buzzing gnats like these worthless creatures." She spit at the gory remains of a very dead aspirant. "They will send real emissaries with real power. You need to have a plan to kill everyone you meet and, if you value your life, always be ready to run." She directed her stony gaze directly at Temperance. "Violence is admirable, but sometimes escape is the better part of valor. Is that what you are?" I asked, feeling more unsure of myself by the moment. "An emissary to some powerful faction?" She dropped her hands to her sides, lifted her dress, and gave us the smallest of curtsies. "Indeed, I am," she admitted, inclining her head ever so slightly. "You may call me the director. Unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to disclose who I serve, but suffice it to say, they are formidable. You would be wise not to cross them. Not when you have already made so very many powerful enemies." My gut twisted. Formidable was just a polite way of saying terrifying. In the backrooms, Power wasn't measured by titles or words, it was measured by the ability to enforce your will and command the respect of others. This woman was scary, and anyone who could command her allegiance was trouble. It could only be one of the sovereigns who ruled over the lower floors, which narrowed the possibilities dramatically. From what I've learned, there were 7 sovereigns, each with the powers of a small g god. The Lord of Coin, Dark Geppetto, and the Iron Tyrant. The sorority queen of Kappa Theta and Raya Troy, who ruled over the Badland boys down on floor 713. And, of course, the flayed monarch of the Skinless Court and the Boundless Wanderer, who was the only sovereign without a kingdom to call his own. The only question was, who did this lady owe fidelity to? It could have been any of them, even the flayed monarch, though that seemed less likely. As for what I want, she continued, her tone almost casual, I'm here to help you, Dan. To prepare you for what's coming. And what's that, exactly? I asked, not bothering to mask my skepticism. War, of course. What else? She answered as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Great things are transpiring, Dan, and you happen to be a fulcrum. A turning point. As I said, you are a minnow, but one with the potential to grow into a shark. Perhaps even a legendary kraken. It seems you have acquired something valuable. Something that belonged to the monarch. Her voice was soft now, the words were hardly more than a whisper. Something that has effectively crippled his empire. Before your arrival, she said, her eyes boring into my chest as though she could see right to my core, the monarch had a web of doors that connected his kingdom to virtually every floor. It was one of the things that made him so very dangerous. But his web is gone, while yours is spreading. She offered me a conspiratorial grin. She knew my secret. Knew about the compass of the catacomber. Needless to say, his forces are coming for you. To take back what belongs to him. To restore the glory of his kingdom. And although you have made some admirable strides, make no mistake, you are running out of time. Soon it won't be level 16 aspirants loitering on your doorstep, it will be level 60 outer disciples. Or level 100 court nobles. You won't survive them. None of you will. Not as you are. Her smile stretched wider, though it never quite reached her eyes. But there's a way to turn the tide. Let me guess, I said dryly, fighting to suppress my own fear. That way just so happens to align with whatever your boss wants? Exactly, she said, unbothered by my sarcasm. Mutual benefit, Dan. That's what I'm offering. What my employer is offering you. You grow stronger, my employer's enemies grow weaker, and everyone wins. Except, of course, for the flayed monarch. She chuckled softly, as though sharing a private joke. He will lose. And isn't that what you want? Her words sank in like jagged hooks that I couldn't shake. As much as I hated to admit it, she had a point. That was exactly what I wanted. The monarch was gunning for me, and I wasn't strong enough to face him, not yet. But accepting her help meant stepping into a game I didn't understand, one with rules written by people far above my pay grade. And in the backrooms, pawns didn't usually make it to the end game. Why us? Temperance asked, her tone as sharp as her cleaver. If this employer of yours is so powerful, why not simply handle this themselves, I wonder? Politics, the director replied with a sniff and a resigned sigh. With these things, dear Temperance, the answer is always politics. Unfortunately, my employer cannot openly move against the Skinless Court. Not yet, at any rate. Which is why they must find proxies to do it for them. There is a tenuous balance of power between the sovereigns, and should my employer act openly, it could invite incursions and reprisals. But you, Dan. She traced a fingernail along her bottom lip as she watched me. Appraised me. Judged me. You're a wild card, aren't you? A variable no one accounted for. That makes you valuable. Or disposable, I replied. Perhaps both, she admitted with a shrug. But even a disposable tool can carve a path to greatness. A simple hammer becoming more than what it once was. Her gaze darted to the tool in my hand. The question is, will you do what is necessary to seize it? I glanced at Croc and Temperance. The mimic was watching me with unshakable trust. Temperance, ever the cynic, looked ready to fight but willing to listen. Their faith in me was both grounding and suffocating. Whatever decision I made, it wouldn't just affect me, it would affect them, too. Okay, I finally said, my voice firm. Let's say, just for the sake of argument, that I believe you. Let's say I'm interested. What exactly are you offering? Information, first and foremost, she replied. She slowly made her way toward my kiosk, then rested a hand against the counter. What do you know about these? She asked. About the kiosk network? I shrugged. I know they serve as trade hubs, and I also know they're all owned by someone or something called the franchisor. That's more than most, the director said, though far from the whole picture. As I mentioned, you have crippled the skilless court's logistical capabilities. The monarch cannot effectively move his forces, which is the only reason you're still alive. Even for powerful delvers, it takes a great deal of time to move from the 999th to the 7th. To make up for this painful shortcoming, she continued, the skilless court has been relying on the kiosk network to handle supply chain issues. The monarch is using the auction house system as his own personal trade depot, transferring vast stores of resources between floors. That, however, is not the only thing the court is using the network for. Although it isn't common knowledge, the kiosk network is not just metaphysical in nature. It can also serve as a physical transit system, allowing individuals, or even whole armies, to quickly travel between floors. Although the franchisor's lair is on the 99th floor, the network itself extends all the way to floor 355. The monarch has allied himself with the franchisor and is using the network as a way to move his forces. But if something unfortunate should happen to the franchisor. She trailed off, leaving the rest unspoken. Then the monarch would no longer be able to use the network to navigate through the backrooms, I finished, seeing exactly where this conversation was going. Brilliant insight, she said. It was impossible to miss her patronizing tone. Now, it just so happens that it would also be an employer's best interest if an accident were to befall the franchisor, but once again politics prevent them from acting openly. The franchisor is allied with the monarch, but it also has ties to a sovereign called the Lord of Coins. His lordship has a tenuous truce with my employer, and the network has made the Lord of Coins an extremely wealthy man. As you might imagine, he would not be well pleased if my employer were to intervene directly. It could spark open conflict which would get messy for everyone. But if we do it, I muttered, then your boss has plausible deniability. We're the fall guy. I never promised the path to greatness would be easy or safe, Dan, the director said. Yes, going after the franchisor is a risk. Yes, you're courting trouble with the Lord of Coins, but failing to act now is as good as a death sentence. When you find yourself falling off the edge of a cliff, you grab for whatever lifeline you can, even if that lifeline is serpent coiled among the rocks. I am just such a serpent. Now, I won't lie to you, killing the franchisor would be hellishly difficult, especially considering your level. And you must act quickly if you wish to stop the monarch's forces before they are kicking down your door. Something malicious twinkled in her pale eyes. It isn't impossible, though. You already have several advantages working in your favor. She patted the kiosk. I've also left several powerful items for you, including a map that will help you quickly reach the franchisor's lair using a series of spatial kiosk gateways. Still, I must offer you a word of warning. The spatial gateways are guarded by powerful creatures, eternally loyal to the monarch and the skinless court. She paused and grimaced. The dweller who rules the 24th floor is a particularly insidious foe. Getting past it will likely prove to be problematic. A grimace briefly flashed across her face. Consider it a test of sorts. If you can survive what's on 24, you might just have a chance at surviving what's to come. And, fortunately for you, my employer's gift should help, assuming you are bold enough to take my advice and expand your own budding kingdom by removing the franchisor. And you mean to simply give these items to us? Temperance asked, sounding as suspicious as I felt. As a gesture of goodwill? The woman's laughter rang out like shattering glass. "What is astonishing to you," she said, as her laughter subsided, "isn't worth getting out of bed in the morning for someone like my employer. These are baubles, trinkets, and a very small price to pay when considering the potential return on investment. And if you chose not to pursue the franchisor..." She paused and shrugged, apparently uncensored. "Well, it's no skin off my teeth. Besides, I have faith that you'll do the right thing, Dan. By which I mean the thing that serves your own self-interest. You're both too smart and too desperate to do anything else." Then, without another word, she turned on one heel, snapped her fingers and simply disappeared. I'd felt a strong pulse of mana, but there had been no flash of light. No fancy portal. She had been here one moment, then gone the next like a bad fever dream. Her disappearance was so abrupt, it was almost possible to think I'd imagined the whole thing. The cubed bodies disabused me of that notion. So did the items she'd left behind in the kiosk. Tope continued,